Well, let's speak now to the Leader of the House of Commons, Andrea Leadsom. Ms Leadsom, a very good morning to you. A busy day ahead for you, one suspects. Can we just have confirmed the way in which that full legal advice will be released?
Well, we will publish it this morning. The plan is at 11:30.
Why was the government so reticent to publish in full the advice that members of Cabinet like yourself had seen?
On a point of principle, so there are conflicting constitutional issues here. Of course, the House of Commons has the right, through the humble address, to require papers, and having passed its vote yesterday, we will comply with that. But there's a really important constitutional principle whereby law officers give confidential, frank advice to government ministers, and its very existence is not normally published, let alone the advice itself. And the reason that's so important is because now, following the vote yesterday, as I say, we will comply with it, the problem in future will be that law officers will think twice about the type of advice that they give to government, and government will have to think very carefully about what sort of advice they ask for fear that the House of Commons might again in future require it to be fully disclosed. So there are two very important principles here, one which is the preeminence of the House of Commons, and the other which is the importance of confidential and impartial advice. And those two things were in clash yesterday. And actually I do think that parliamentarians who want to be in government in the future will live to regret the decision they took last night.
Well, indeed, but on reflection, was this strategically the best day to have that particular battle? Could you not have let it slide? I mean, we have not had a government held in contempt in this way ever before. Now, that might be framed in arcane parliamentary language, but on a day full of embarrassments for the Prime Minister, that was a pretty big one.
Well, again, you know, this was not of the government's timing. The Attorney General came to the House on Monday for a 2.5-hour statement where he answered every single question from all members, and also published a 48-page document setting out all of the legal implications of the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration. So the House of Commons was in absolutely no doubt whatsoever about the Attorney General's legal advice. So the issue yesterday, the decision of opposition parties to hold this vote on contempt, was really one that they were determined to see the confidential advice. And I argued very hard that this was a very difficult breach, that the House had seen all of the legal advice, and that this should be a step that they shouldn't take. But of course, with the state that the House of Commons is in, it really went on to party political lines, I'm afraid, and I deeply regret that.
I wonder if we might just move on to the amendment put forward and agreed by the House, put forward by Dominic Raab, of course, your former colleague in Cabinet. What's your understanding of the effect that has? We heard from Dominic Raab a few minutes ago suggesting, look, it's not binding, it can be ignored. In fact, let's just have a listen to what Mr Raab said a few minutes ago.
What is clear is that the vote yesterday will not affect the ultimate outcome, because votes in Parliament on motions are not legally binding. So if
no, absolutely. But
sorry,
politically,
can I just finish the point?
Yeah, but politically, I mean, understand the legal argument, but politically, are you saying that that could be ignored by the government?
Look, to reverse the course of Brexit will require legislation or lack of will in number 10 Downing Street. And I believe this Prime Minister is true to her word that she's going to deliver Brexit. She always said no deal was better than a bad deal. And I think if Parliament turns this deal down, we shouldn't flounce off. We should go back and make a reasonable best final offer to Brussels. But ultimately, we do need to be willing to walk away. And that's the only way in any negotiation you get sensible terms.
Mr Raab, you're arguing that you're ignoring the will of the House of Commons. That didn't work out very well for you yesterday, did it?
What I'm doing is setting the clear constitutional position, which is motions of Parliament are politically have weight for sure, but they don't legally bind the government. And what matters right now, both domestically but also in Brussels, is political resolve and will.
So let's just be clear, Dominic Raab's amendment doesn't matter.
I didn't say it didn't matter. I said it didn't have legally binding force, and therefore it cannot alone stop Brexit or reverse the outcome. And the outcome is that unless something changes matters, we will leave the EU at the end of March with a deal or without a deal. I would like us to get a deal, but we're going to have to be much tougher with Brussels, much firmer and more resolute if we're going to get them to take us more seriously.
Well, Ms Leadsom, you managed to hear in full there the views of Dominic Raab. So very straightforward question. Will the government honour that amendment?
Well, Dominic Raab's amendment, which I fully understand, gives the House a further opportunity to give its views on an amendable vote basis in the event that this deal doesn't go through. And that's perfectly fine. I understand why he wants to do that. But Dominic Raab's assessment is correct that in order for the March 29th leaving the EU to change, there needs to be legislation. So if it's not the Prime Minister's deal through the withdrawal agreement or another deal, then the default position will be no deal next March the 29th.
But do you not want to have, I mean, one of the common complaints that has been made by both sides of the House, by people on both sides of the House, is that they haven't had sufficient input, that there hasn't been consensus gathered. Surely Mr Greaves' amendment at least suggests, if it was honoured by the government, it would suggest that you are open to new ideas, open to fresh approaches, because as things stand, the deal that Theresa May says is the only one on the table is not going to pass the House on Tuesday.
Well, you know, I really hope that colleagues will listen very carefully over the next few days of debate. There's been an awful lot of misunderstandings about what's in the withdrawal agreement and in the political declaration. And the truth of it is that there isn't a majority for a particular solution in Parliament. And the Prime Minister has been clear. She has negotiated as hard as she believes is feasible, is realistic with the European Union. It's been a very tough negotiation. I know for many of my Brexit colleagues, and of course for me too, the issue of the backstop is a very concerning one. And that is a matter of political risk. Will we end up in it? And I think what should be clear...
Just on that, Ms Leadsom, you have concerns about the backstop, but as things stand, you agree with the deal?
Yes, I'm not happy about the backstop, but what I was going to say is it is a matter of political risk. The EU also very much do not want the backstop. What it does is it gives the UK access to EU markets without free movement, without making any contributions to their budget, without the common fisheries policy and without the common agricultural policy. So EU 27 are not happy about that. Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt again. I'm being so horribly ungallant, but it does rather sound to me that you would prefer if the Prime Minister lost on Tuesday, went to Brussels and renegotiated the deal.
I'm not saying that at all. What I'm asking is for colleagues to listen very carefully to the proposals over the next few days in the run-up to the meaningful vote, to be absolutely clear what is being talked about in this deal. For me, the reason why I can live with this deal and support this deal is because it's the only deal on the table, and it's my political assessment that it's unlikely that we would find ourselves in that backstop.
But just once again, in terms of there being further input from the body politic, from the backbenches on that deal under Mr Greaves' amendment, just very straightforwardly, will the government honour that opportunity for MPs to do so?
Of course, the government will honour the opportunity for MPs to express a vote. That was the express will of the House yesterday, and we will, of course, honour it. But just to put this in perspective, you know, during the Withdrawal Act, we had 1,500 hours of debate, 1,500 amendments proposed, and nearly 300 hours of debate on that Withdrawal Act. It was one of the most contributed to ever in the House of Lords, more speakers to it than on any bill ever before. You know, just in the last couple of weeks, the Prime Minister has spoken at the dispatch box on the subject of her deal for more than 12 hours, taking questions from across the House of Commons. So there has been a huge amount of input. We now have the second day today of 5 days with 8 hours each day protected time of discussion on the meaningful vote, and then culminating in votes next Tuesday. So all colleagues will have had the opportunity to air their views, to air their concerns, to put forward their alternative proposals. But just to be clear, there isn't a majority in the House for one particular solution over another. And the default position, if we cannot agree a deal, is that we leave the EU next March without a deal.
Do you honestly never sit at home at night in front of the fire and say to yourself, do you know what, this could have all been different if only they'd made me leader of the Conservative Party?
Well, I very rarely get the chance to sit at home in front of the fire. Maybe that's the answer. No, I think the Prime Minister has shown such incredible determination and tenacity. There is no doubt that she has really worked in the national interest to try and get this deal through, to try and balance the interests of the big majority, 17.4 million people, the biggest democratic exercise ever, who voted to leave the EU, whilst at the same time protecting our economy, protecting jobs, and protecting the views of those on the Remain side of the argument who want to continue to have a very close relationship with the EU. And I think what she's offering is the best of both worlds: freedom to be a global free trading nation, whilst at the same time keeping a very special and deep relationship with our EU friends and neighbours.